Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave, and we'd love to hear where you think we've got our commentary right and where you think we've completely missed the mood of the age that we're in. You can do that by visiting unsilentpodcast.com or social media channels. In particular, Rumble has a fantastic place where you can leave comments. So, Brian, good to see you. Glad we've both got
likewise.
Unsilent garb on. I've
got our team jerseys on,
team jerseys, the black T-shirt. Now mine, just for a little inside baseball for our viewers and listeners. I have my set of black T-shirts because I picked that up from Steve Jobs. Not personally, he didn't come to me one day and say
he delivered them to you,
or T-shirt, but that was one of his sort of life hacks was wear the same thing every day. He wore a black mock turtleneck like every day, and it saves your brain power from having to deal with other things. So that's how I prepare.
Vision fatigue is what I remember that being called. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this is how I prepare for the podcast. I just wear the same shirt every time.
I wear black T-shirts. I have an array of them. I have, I don't know, probably 6 or 8 of them.
Oh yeah.
I wear them because I tend to spill salsa on my shirt and things like that. So.
You have the very philosophically
white T-shirts. White T-shirts don't last very long in my wardrobe.
Okay, well, I appreciate that transparency, Ryan. That's really good.
Yeah. I want to kick things off and share something with you that I saw this today, and it's only about a 26-second clip. I just thought it was really kind of funny and give Kenny G, the guy we're talking to 70 years in the future, explaining what this moment in time is like. I think this would give him a little bit of insight as to where we're at today and what the things we are focusing on and whatnot. This apparently a congressional hearing that happened, I don't know, maybe today, maybe a couple of days ago, or I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but they're talking about men and women's or biological men in women's sports. So I'll play the clip and then we can chat about it afterwards here.
All right.
You stated your organization's mission is to ensure safety and opportunity for all girls. Was Peyton McNabb safe on September 1st of 2022?
It sounds like she definitely wasn't.
Thank
what happened
you.
to her was tragic. I would argue, though, that the answer is to ensure that people can't spike volleyballs into people's heads. That seems unsafe.
Thank you for your answer, Ms. Grave.
So we're talking about the girl who's had a face injury or a head injury from a biological male spiking the volleyball in a game, and this person testifying before Congress, the solution is to now just ban spiking in volleyball.
Yeah, there you go. That's the obvious solution to that is just change the entire sport of volleyball so it can't be played.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
but I'm not like a volleyball aficionado, but what I've just thought that like perfectly kind of encapsulates like how we approach solutions now.
Yeah. Completely ignore the actual cause of the problem and some tertiary thing that isn't even possible.
Yeah, kids are getting lower grades in school, so let's just stop testing.
Yeah. Exactly. It makes absolutely no sense to anybody who's listening or has half a brain. But I
don't know, David. It makes sense to 48% of the population. I mean,
it's an example of what we've discussed when we've talked about how people are so committed to their ideology that facts that contradict that ideology have to be ignored or depreciated, and the ideology must reign supreme above reality. So reality is not important. Ideology is critical. And that's what
I guess what I said is not true. 48% of the people, last couple elections have voted for progressive candidates,
right?
But I guess probably only 15 or so % agree with those kinds of solutions.
Yeah, there's broad consensus in the country that it's a really bad idea to have a 6'5" dude with a beard playing high school women's sports. I mean, that's I think.
Well, it also just seems to fly in the face of what Title IX was all about. Like the whole point of Title IX, I thought, was to provide women a place to play sports and do those things, and now they don't necessarily have that.
Right. Well, because
counter to what the original intent was.
and that's and again that to the defense of that is, well, that's what we're doing. We're doing it for women, and trans women are women. I mean, I remember attending an event one time, and I having a conversation with somebody, and I said, well, don't you believe in women's rights? And they said, well, trans women are women. I said, well, how do you define, how can you define that? And there, it's just like when they were interviewing Ketanji Brown Jackson, said, well, you want to be on the Supreme Court, you must be pretty smart. What's a woman? Well, I don't have a degree in biology. I'm only a lawyer. It's like, okay.
I gotta tell you, it's actually kind of funny you bring that up. It's interesting how many times a week I think about that congressional confirmation hearing.
Yeah.
Because what keeps going through my mind is, here's a person on the Supreme Court, and I don't know. I've never like cracked the law books on the federal level and like perused them for reading.
Right.
But I gotta imagine the word woman is in there, I don't know, a few hundred, maybe a few thousand times.
You would think. Yeah.
So if a person on the Supreme Court, I mean, what's she gonna do? She's gonna recuse herself from anything where it has where the word woman, the law word uses the word. She's gonna recuse herself from those things because she's not qualified to make judgment on those things. Like,
Right.
it's absolutely silly.
Well, and I will tell you, Brian, when all this transgender discussions and transgender rights and all this started coming up, I don't know what, 10 years ago, 15 years, whenever it started, I don't even remember. But and I looked at it and thought, yeah, this isn't going anywhere. I mean, this is just so completely ridiculous. I mean, you have to be, there's nobody above a kindergarten education that can't tell the difference between a male and a female. And I thought, this is not going anywhere. It's not going to be a big issue. It's going to go away in a month or so. And I remain flabbergasted at how completely bewitched people are into denying the most fundamental reality that exists in human nature. There's difference between men and women. It's just,
I think it highlights one of the kind of core principles that you and I have come up with over the last year and a half or whatever we've been doing this, that we all have this belief system, like they would do that,
right? Yes. Exactly. And then they do, and it's like,
and then they do.
And
so in great news though, I saw this article. This is from Science Magazine. It looks like Antarctica gains ice for the first time in decades, reversing the trend of mass loss. And so, first I'm like, well, I guess that's good. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the proper balance is of how much ice we want, how much is good, how much is bad. I've been hearing for my entire adult life that we're losing ice, and pretty soon the Statue of Liberty is going to be underwater and all this kind of stuff. And but here's how and I think that the reason I'm bringing this up is not just that, okay, well, let's see what happens with this news, if anything. My guess is nothing in the short term, but here's how cynical I've gotten. So immediately I was like, well, that's cool, I guess. Again, I don't know what the right amount of ice we're supposed to have is. I don't know what we're aiming for there, but okay, that seems cool. But my very next thought was, oh, so in 7 years, the problem with climate change won't be overheating. It's going to be cooling too fast.
Well, do you remember? I have in my library, in my I still have VHS tapes, Brian. I'm that old. I still have VHS tapes. So I have VHS tape library, which works well because now I have a grandson. I can recycle all the tapes that I had for my kids when they were growing up.
All the Disney movies and stuff that came in the cushy covers and all. Yeah.
Before they became insane, I've got all the originals. So, but one of the things I have in my VHS tape collection is the coming ice age. It's a video. It was, who was it near? It wasn't Leonard Nimoy. It was narrated by somebody important with a good voice who does those kinds of things. And that was a thing back in, maybe it was the early 80s or late 70s or mid 80s, something like that. There was the catastrophe that we're facing was going to be that. And then of course, then changed to global warming, and then it changed to climate change, and and that's where we find ourselves now. Yeah, and again, my analysis of all those things is that it's the whole Rahm Emanuel, never let a good crisis go to waste. Yeah, there's stuff
Right.
happening. Yeah, there's been, the climate has changed, and we're a part of the ecosystem, so we're part of the climate. So yeah, we can have an effect. I don't necessarily know that we are we don't have the levers of control to change everything unless we launch nukes all over the world. But
Yeah.
and again, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but the whole idea of using a crisis to generate more power and more tax revenue, and redistribute wealth has been fairly well documented. And that's so yeah, I think in this case, even if this continues year after year after year, they'll say, well, that's just evidence of climate change. It's changing.
Right.
And but
Well,
and
yeah, they built this argument that no matter anything that is not exactly how it was in 1936 is any deviation up or down is bad, right?
right.
Wherever they've decided the Industrial Revolution began. I'm looking for something. I thought I saved it, but maybe it was quite a while ago. You and I spent a lot of time talking about long-term cycles, these 80, 100-year cycles.
Yeah.
I swear I saved a video, but if I didn't, it's okay. It's like a 2-hour video, so I wasn't going to play it. But it talks about the cycles of like how much heat the sun puts out,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and it goes through, and they have technical scientific names for it
I
that
read
I
about
don't know
that.
what they are, but and it's about an 80-year cycle,
Yeah.
and or maybe 60 years or something, but something like that. But the scientist in this video is saying, um, we are kind of we're past the peak, and now we're going to be going into a cooling phase, whatever the scientific name for that is. Um, and so over the next 60 or 80 years, it's actually the planet will start cooling.
Right. I've heard
and
that.
and the reason that he's talking about it is because he's a guy who's known in like the financial market. So he's talking about like, well, the actual implications to things like the stock market are going to matter because it gets harder to grow agriculture, and people, when they're
Yeah.
not able to get food, like there's unrest, and there's like social political
Yeah.
ramifications and whatever. And so I was I was just kind of chuckling because, I don't know how much credibility there is to these stories about Bill Gates putting these particles in space and in the atmosphere
Oh
or whatever
yeah.
to reflect the sunlight, whatever.
Geoengineering. Yeah, geoengineering.
Geoengineering.
Yeah.
I don't really know if how much of that is, like the 60 billion mosquitoes he released with whatever kind of altering had happened or whatever. But it seems to me, sitting here in 2025, almost completely predictable that in 5 or 10 years, the panic will be the planet's cooling too fast now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, well, human beings are always going to look at a catastrophe and are always going to use that for power and money. I mean, bottom line, it's always going to happen. And I mean, and all these things, geoengineering is a real thing. I don't know. I've read the things about Gates doing this or that. I don't know about that, but I do know that geoengineering is a real thing, and there's lots of people talking about that. But then, you look at large scale, societal or engineering events in the past. So I think, and look how they turned out. So one of the things that I would point to say that we should be very careful about such things is China. China had their biggest thing they probably ever did to their population was the one child policy, right?
Yeah.
And as a result of their one child policy, because we're gaining people too fast, we can't sustain them all. It's unsustainable. We're going to die of starvation. It reminds me of Paul Ehrlich's the population bomb back in the '60s, and his bet with the Economist, a person that said no, we're going to be fine and all this. And as a result of China's one-child policy, their demographic implosion is far worse than it is in a lot of other places. They just don't
Right.
have enough girls, and they need girls to have babies, it turns out. And boys, when they can't find girls to have babies with, tend to get grouchy. And I mean, there's
Yeah.
lots of bad things that happen. So these broad scale, and sure, they had a population growth problem, but we always look at these large scale problems, and sure, the earth has warmed, and I'm sure humans have something to do with it, but we look at these large scale problems and we evaluate them in the moment, and we say,
Yeah.
this is bad, and this moment of time in time is going to continue on an upward and to the right cycle for the foreseeable future, as opposed to things change pretty dramatically due to factors well beyond our ability to understand. I mean, we're as advanced as we've ever been scientifically in the world today, as a human society today, but we still only know a tiny fraction of what can be known. I mean, we don't even know. We assume the universe is made up of like 80% of what the universe is made up of. We call dark matter. We don't really know what it is, but
Right.
80% of everything is the thing we don't know what it is. And so we just have this notion that we know so much. And yes, according to history and according to comparisons of 100 years ago, 200, yeah, we know a lot, but it's like a 3-year-old knows a whole heck of a lot more than they knew when they were 1-year-old. We're still
Yeah.
infants in this stuff, and so these broad scale projects like the one child policy, or geoengineering on a global scale where we're going to reflect the sunlight back, and yeah, that's the stuff that apocalyptic sci-fi movies are made out of.
Right. The hubris is just off the charts. Like, so,
That's it. That's
you
it.
know, the planet's been here for, 4 billion years or 14 billion years,
Right.
whatever the 4 billion years is the last estimate I think I heard that was from a fairly seemingly credible source. Um, Humans, some form of humans have been around for, depending on who you listen to, 50 to 250,000 years, somewhere in that range. I don't know what the right answer is. Um, but and we've gone through ice ages, we've gone through mini ice ages, we've gone through droughts, we've gone through, catastrophic volcanic eruptions, catastrophic asteroid impacts. Like, we've gone through these catastrophic things, and still the Earth seemed like a pretty cool place to live. I
Yeah.
don't know, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 20 years ago, like whatever, right? Um, we've decided as a society that over the last, I don't know, let's say from 1960 until 1980 to 1990, somewhere in that 20 to 40-year period, we decided that we had enough information gathered in that small period of time to determine what the right way the planet is supposed to operate.
Right.
uh, Forgetting the 200,000 years of human existence or the 4 billion years the planet's been around, we decided we know what's best for the planet, the solar system, the universe, based, again, like you said, we probably understand, our comprehension of the science behind all this stuff is probably 1/10 of 1%,
Yeah.
best case scenario, right?
Sure.
The things we don't know vastly outweigh the things we do know.
Right.
But we decided we understand this stuff so well, we're gonna make these great big changes to get it back the way we want. Not considering what the consequences are, as you
Right.
pointed out. Um, but B, not even knowing if the thing we're doing is addressing the right thing, and
Right.
who decided what the right temperature for the planet is.
Yeah.
Like, as if this is a human decision, which kind of is a segue into the topic that I know you want to get to, which is we find ourselves trying to play God in these situations,
Yeah.
which I find just absolutely remarkable. And so the question that kind of comes to me is, again, I'm not a theologian. I've never read the Bible cover to cover. I think I think there will be a better place if we all followed a lot of things that are in there for sure.
Sure.
But it does lead me to wonder: is this kind of, if you are a Christian, you do believe in a God and things
Yeah.
like that? Uh, is this kind of like, okay, well, I tried to make this perfect place, you didn't like it, and you want to run it your way for a while, and this is kind of unfolding as, like, it's kind of almost as like you would expect it to unfold. Okay, well, I tried to do this thing, you didn't like it, now you're gonna do it your way, and I'm just gonna let you, I'm just gonna take my hands off and let you guys do all these stupid things, and, like,
Yeah.
we'll see how that works out.
Well, and that is a story as old as the Bible, and it also connects to these ages that we're in, this fourth turning age that we're in. So I want to connect all that together. One of the things that occurs to me is once you go through the high of winning World War II and starting to organize society, we began to believe in the 60s, this whole idea of the Great Society programs and all that. We began to believe that we were the masters of our own destiny. We conquered
Yeah.
evil. We conquered Nazism. We're organizing the world. And so it's very natural for us then to believe, coming out of all of that into the 70s and 80s, that, well, there's no problem that's beyond our capability to solve. And because look what we've done. And that's how great empires are. There used to be a thing in the height of the British Empire. These pub songs that they sang, I just happen to know one of them. where they said, they talk about basically the British Empire's manifest destiny, the God that's made us great is going to make us greater still. And
Yeah.
that arrogance led them to be basically now a small former empire, island country, nice folks, love London. It's a great place, been there,
Yeah.
but that's happened over and over and over again. So I think that's what's led us to this catastrophism and that idea when that's shaken, because we haven't been able to solve like all these big problems, climate change and all these, we haven't been able to solve that. And so therefore we either admit that we can't solve it or we turn into Chicken Little, and that's what's happened. But that also, going even further back, that's the story of the Israelites in the Bible. The Israelites in the Bible, in the time of Saul, and without getting too into all the stories, but in the time of Saul, God blessed Saul, and they conquered they conquered the Amorites and the Canaanites, conquered all these people, and they got full of themselves. Oh well, and then God said, "No, Saul, I did this, you didn't do this. You're out, dude. David's in." But David, had his own scenario like that. There's nothing that's really beyond me. That girl Bathsheba, she's pretty cute. I'm king. He was called on that, obviously, and the kingdom of Israel was that same thing, where we get full of ourselves, we're the greatest kingdom in the world, then we forsake God, we forsake the principles that have gotten us there, and then they just collapse back, and God curses them. They go into captivity, over and over and over. This is the cycle of humanity, and we're witnessing it once again. Every great empire goes through that, and that's the time that and
Yeah.
the
I
cycles of that
I think the difference this time though is on a global scale, we are much less religious than we were, let's say, post World War II.
Yes.
Now again, I wasn't around in 1742 or 1163, or
it was a great time, let me tell you.
I wasn't around then, but my perception is that we are much more inclined to believe that we have all the answers rather than God has all the answers. And that feels like a pretty giant leap, in addition to all the things you're talking about. This leap of, we are supposed to reflect sunlight because we know this stuff better than whatever creator there was of the universe, whether it was happenstance in the Big Bang Theory or intelligent design, whatever. We have all the answers based on this 20 years of scientific breakthrough we had. Or if you want to look at 100 years of scientific breakthrough we had, let's say from the Wright brothers, until we land on the moon was like, what, it was 66 years or something like that. We have this massive trajectory in technology advancement, cars and computers and all this kind of stuff. But holy smokes, did it go to our head?
Oh yeah, no, exactly. And now, and to the subject that I was going to chat about a little bit, and now once people are realizing how we failed in so many of these things, we failed in controlling the world, we failed in solving poverty. I mean, we've done a lot of good stuff. I mean, worldwide hunger is down. There's a lot of very good things we've accomplished, but it turns out we're not gods after all. And so one of the things that I find really fascinating now is not just in the United States, but the United States, Europe, a lot of places in the world, there is a resurgence of faith and a resurgence, a return to Christianity in particular. And the fascinating thing about this is, for most of my lifetime, churches were not predominantly, but were more than their fair share of females, and more their fair share of women. The people that are returning to church now, and old people, you get near you're going to die, and you start thinking about eternal things. You're not, so concerned about going to the bar. You're like, oh, am I going to make it another 10 years? All that. So it's been a lot of old people and women, again, oversimplifying. But now the ones that are going back to church and going back to conservative churches are the younger people and the younger men in particular, young males. In fact, I think it's in was Europe. I don't remember the stats offhand, but there's one of the recent Pew surveys. They study these things, and one of the recent Pew surveys was talking about how there's like a 12% resurgence in across Europe. I mean, Europe has basically been, a godless place for a long time.
Yeah.
But and the ones that are the fascinating thing to me about that is a lot of them, a lot of the churches that are getting the new adherents and the new followers and attendees and congregants are like the Catholic Church, the churches that are more traditional. There's been in the Catholic Church itself, like I'm not a Catholic, I'm a Protestant, so I can't speak with authority on Catholicism, but in the Catholic Church, there's been a resurgence of the Latin Mass, where they actually read the priest reads the service in Latin. Now nobody
Interesting.
knows Latin
Okay.
anymore
Nobody knows what they're saying, but yeah.
Nobody knows what they're saying. But there's an appeal and there's a desire for something eternal. There's an appeal and a desire for something strong. I mean, in the U.S., you find that with a lot of conservative congregations. Now, some people have said, well, there's also obviously we've talked about before a resurgence in conservatism. Maybe this is an offshoot of that, or maybe it's just parallel to that. There's a desire.
Yeah, I mean, you and I talked a couple months ago about the demographics. Young women are trending still much more progressive. Young men have broken off where they were kind of in alignment for 20, 30 years or whatever from the 60s and let's say till 2010. I don't know the exact numbers because I don't have the stats in front of me, but they were trending more or less in line with each other. And then there's been a break since about 2014, 2016, 2018, somewhere in there, where the young men are definitely more conservative on average, and the young women are still trending much more progressive. So it is an interesting question. Is it are they related, or are they just happenstance that they're both that way? I don't know that, but
Well, I do think if you look at I think I don't think one is causative of the other, is causal of the other. I think they are parallel to each other. But I think to a great extent they're caused by the same thing. And that is that, we look around and there's nothing foundational I mean, men and women, we were just talking about that. We don't even know what the heck a bloody woman is. So you've got nothing foundational. And men in particular, to overgeneralize, we like to have things solid. We're more task oriented, sometimes practical. And so therefore, when there's nothing that we can point to that is a solid foundation from a man's perspective, it's like, well, let's take a look at some things that are eternal. Let's take a look at, or things that even, the Latin Mass. Okay, well, what's so special about the Latin Mass? Well, it's old, it's tried, and it's true. The same thing about a lot of Christian faith. It's a 2,000-year-old faith. It's tried and true. Sure, there's been abuses, and well, everything's had abuses. Doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
But I think that desire has influenced both the trend towards conservatism, which is conserving what was and conserving what worked, and it's the trend towards more conservative theological positions or theological positions, period, because nothing else has worked. Government didn't work, the societal enlightenment didn't work, solving global warming, none of these things worked. And so what's left? Well, God's left.
Yeah, I think there's also again just that kind of a practicality to it. Like again, we kicked off today's podcast with that clip of the woman saying the solution to volleyball spikes hurting a girl is not to remove the biological man, is to remove the spiking.
Spikes, yeah.
I think that, again, way over generalizing things, but I think that by and large, young men would say that's ridiculous more than young women would.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a practical element to it. I also, I still am really, I don't know if, again, it's just my gut. I have no scientific studies or nothing like that to back this up, but I do think that one of the main for me anyway, one of the main themes of going from 1949, let's say post World War II, to 2019 is the change in personal responsibility and duty then to the problems are all external and entitlement in 2019. I think that the more men get away from duty and things like that, I think it just kind of rubs at their core kind of the wrong way. You know what I mean? I think that how men bond is through duty and personal sacrifice and personal responsibility, and like men judge other men can I count on you when I need you? Like
Right.
that in a, if you say you're going to come help me move and you don't show up, like we remember that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think more than women. Again, very broad brush, painting with here. Um, but it kind of all seems to fit together to me. Like, well, of course, men are going to go back to a place where we focus on personal responsibility rather than
Right.
external factors ruining my life.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, and I think men are men as the kind of the hunters, not the nurturers. I
Yeah,
think when you look at a society where and I don't want to say that women are impractical or else I'll get in all sorts of trouble, but men tend to focus on kind of these bread and butter, meat and potatoes kinds of things, and
yeah,
when all of those things come into question, you look to, well, what philosophy didn't say these types of things? Well, it
right.
turns out that the founding fathers philosophy, the philosophy of the early church fathers, etc. Yeah, they dealt with spiritual things, but a lot of what they dealt with was building a society, building a practical society, and there were depredations, but this was that's been lost. All of that's been lost.
Yeah.
Now, it's also important to point out for Kenny G's sake that when something like this happens, I mean, you might call it, some people are calling this like a revival. And sure, I think there's parts of that are true, but I think it's also true that when those things happen, that there's a fringe of people that will take it in unhealthy directions. So I've
Oh, of
watched,
course.
there's a lot of this idea of Christian nationalism. Now, I am a nationalist because I'm a patriotic American, and I mean, I get teary eyed when I hear the anthem play and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
I'm as patriotic as they come. I'm also a Christian, but
Yeah.
I don't want to take those two things together and say, okay, you got to do it my way. You got to attend
Right.
my church. But there are people, and there's some commentators that are talking about this return to tradition in a very militant way. I mean, I've seen
Yeah.
some people online that are talking about, well, the worst thing ever. We got to repeal. Well, what gave women the right to vote? I mean, it was suffrage, but which amendment? I can't remember which amendment it was. Whatever amendment it was, like the 18th Amendment or
Yeah.
something.
16th, 17th, somewhere in there. Yeah,
One of the
19th.
teen amendments, shall we say.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's people, well, that was the worst thing ever. We need to return to, pre-suffrage. And, there's people that are
Yeah.
taking it too far. And that's who you're going to get pointed
I
to.
also don't know that I would consider that to be a Christian value.
No, I don't. I don't at
Christian.
all. No, I don't either. I don't either. I think, however, I think for Kenny G's sake, when he sees his fourth turning era happen, he will see once again a return to faith on a greater scale than he saw during the previous part of his life. After the enlightenment that will follow the next age, that's the
Yeah.
next generation that follows our generation, there'll be an enlightenment, awakening kind of
Yeah.
era in which there'll
My
be.
my hunch is on the whole young men specifically, and eventually everyone, young people, and collectively, even for that matter, moving towards a sense of duty, personal responsibility. I think we ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah,
I think
no, I
this is
agree.
just the very, very tip of the
Right.
iceberg because, in crisis eras, you have to have a tribe of people
That's
you
right.
can count on, and you develop your reputation will very much be tied to how reliable you are and
Yeah.
how people can count on you and what you bring to the table more or less. And there's that old saying that is oftentimes used in business, but I think it applies in life too. Like 80% is just showing up.
Yeah.
And the people who show up are going to be the people who are probably going to fare better than people who don't. And I would argue that people who are more conservative in their thinking and believe in personal responsibility are more likely to show up.
Yeah.
Now I don't mean show up to riots. I
Right.
think that
Yeah.
I think that that's probably not true when it comes to rioting and taking down statues and things like that. But I mean, showing up in a meaningful way to serve others and put their needs before yours and things like that. I don't think we're going to have a choice but to go through that. So
Right.
that all makes sense to me. I am surprised to see it this early, though. I got to be honest.
Yeah.
I would not have expected 3 years ago to be seeing this today. I would expect it in 2033,
Sure.
not 2025.
Well, and it is that group. So it is the group. I mean, it has to start before the crisis hits. right? Before the crisis event hits. Because when the
Right.
crisis event hits, you got to have people. I mean, let's just assume there's some war involved. There's usually a war involved. Let's just assume there's some war involved. So you got to have people sign up for the draft at that point.
Right.
And those are the people that have, and if you, if you think that the world owes you stuff, if you think that the world is, your oyster and that you're entitled by virtue of being to get free stuff, then you're not going to show up to, take on the dangerous duty of saving the country from the crisis era. So I think it does have to start, and of course I don't know the timing, but Kenny G will see this timing and will then see another indicator of this crisis era and what's being prepared. So the soldiers of 2033 are being prepared right now by the things that are happening right now. I wonder what Neil Howe would say. I mean, I've heard him speak on the crisis era and all that in a variety of different ways. I wonder what he would say about that notion. But I think it's
I've not heard him say anything about that specifically, but before I get to a couple of things I have heard him kind of say that kind of seem like they go in line with that. Another trend is young people across the board, but especially young men again, don't drink alcohol very much.
Yeah, that's right. It's gone down a lot.
They don't curse very much.
Yeah.
I mean, compared to like my generation,
Yeah.
my generation at 21, like we were in the bar, 5 nights a week and or at least one night a week,
Right.
and our language is very, very rough. And that is not the trend. I see that with young people I'm around,
Sure.
It's different. So one of the things that Neil Howe has said that you and I have talked about a little bit is how the generations that relate to each other are every other, so children rebel against their parents, but they feel close to their grandparents. Well, okay, the ones who are grandparents now have more traditional values.
That's right.
They're more likely to be religious.
Yep.
They didn't drink as much as people who grew up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Right.
I think that there may be something to that.
Yeah.
And there's also just this kind of whatever Generation A does, Generation B kind of does the opposite.
Right. And
we've had this tremendous surge in people leaving religion, leaving conservative thinking and things like that. It's almost like, how could it go any other way than the next generation would rebel and do the opposite of that?
Yeah.
I go back to my George Carlin example. I see it as the same behavior of Richard Nixon being the guy in power and becoming over time seen as a guy who's just not connected to the youth and doesn't really get it and he's out of touch and whatever. And a guy like George Carlin comes along and makes a living poking fun at that guy.
Right.
I don't see it as any different now. The people who were the hippies then are now in power, and it's becoming less popular to support those guys. And young conservative comedians are making their living poking fun at those people because they're out of touch. Now, they talked about Richard Nixon being a square, and they talk about the current regime being like wackos. So the language is way different, but the behavior is the same. The pattern of behavior is the same. As these people make fun of their ancestors, their parents, their grandparents, whatever. They rise to power. Then the next generation or two after that make fun of them. Like, this is how it works.
And I think I think that one of the things that informs that too is people don't like arrogant people. And people don't like know-it-alls, right? And so we perceive the most recent generation or the one right before us as being know-it-alls. They told us what to do. They told us how to live. They told us to cut our hair, all this stuff. And so they don't like know-it-alls. And but the generation that comes out of a crisis era and the rebuild society, by definition, is going to be a know-it-all generation. I mean, they're going to have to be, because they're going to have to essentially reshape society in some new vision or new age. So, or new way of thinking about how to organize the world. So they're going to be know-it-alls. And now, I mean, if you like, I'm in marketing, and so in marketing, one of the things that we know, and this is business person, that people value transparency. People love transparency. They want to know if you make a mistake, they want to know that you're going to own up to the mistake. Well, that's the previous generations. Like, well, you take a look at that notion, that video you showed at the beginning, well, yeah, we should make them stop spiking people. She wasn't owning her mistake, saying, well, yeah, maybe it was a bad idea to have
Yeah.
big dudes, playing the same sports as
Right.
women, because they're not as capable. So I think there's that rebellion that's happening against sort of the know-it-all generation. And
Yeah.
but the funny thing is that the ones that come out of this are going to have to morph into the ones that come out of the crisis when they rebuild society. Our kids and grandkids, when they rebuild society, they're going to have to start it all again, and they're going to have to be the know-it-all generation. And so it just that's
But we always take it too far, Dave. We always take it too far. We don't consistently maintain balance.
well,
We
yeah,
we
I mean,
take
that's
the
the
thing
point.
that got us success in whatever capacity in life, in business, in politics, and we take it too far. We don't know when to
Sure.
stop.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is what causes that
Yeah.
falling out of favor. The other thing Neil Howe talks about that I think is related to religion and all that kind of stuff is, when the first book, The Fourth Turning, came out, and even generations before that,
Yeah.
he talked about how, the young people now, he called the millennials, and now you have Gen Z or whatever, but that kind of cohort are very much community organized or oriented.
Yeah.
Where, you and I are, I think you're a Gen Xer, I'm a Gen Xer. We were very
Right.
independent,
Yep.
we're latchkey kids and all that kind of stuff. And the way we were shaped through society was like, you're on your own, kid. Like,
Yeah.
if you don't figure it out, like, nobody's coming to save you.
Right.
Well, the next generation is going to do the opposite of that. They are very much about community, and they were raised by people who were latchkey kids, and were left, alone a lot as children, and they didn't want that for their kids, and so they doted on them a whole lot more than Gen Xers were doted on by their parents. I don't mean that baby boomers didn't love their kids. I don't mean that,
Right.
but it was just a different dynamic in how families operated, about how much time kids were alone or autonomous or whatever. And this generation has not been shaped like that. They're all about community. Well, what's more community than religion? I mean,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, you could go back in time and, like, good luck finding something other. Militaries would probably be the second closest thing, but those come and go. Religion, like you said, but religion has been around for thousands of years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I do believe that that's another, I mean, you got a choice. You can either join a gang or join a church,
Yeah.
which way you're going to go. But it is fascinating to see that that sort of also informs the tribalism of our day too.
Yeah.
Is that, we want to be part of a community. I mean, one of the sort of indicators to that of that to me is the fact that, like, you go to these campus protests and you ask kids, well, what are you here for? Well, we're here for this. That Okay, well, that's a slogan. What's your philosophy behind that? Well, I don't know. I just, this
Yeah.
is where I need to be. It's like, okay, well, there's
Yeah.
that community, the collapse of community, and I think technology has had a big impact on that too. The collapse of community in general has pushed people towards, you're going to be part of some community. It's Bob Dylan. You got to serve somebody, right? You're going to be part of some
Yeah.
community, and so that's where I think all of the different factions come in, and there's going to be some that are going to return to religion.
Yeah, the last hypothesis I guess I would come up with for why specifically young men are moving more towards religion is, I believe that men more than women want certainty.
Sure.
And I think that, again, going back to, like, you have a concrete set of rules. Now, are you good at following them? Not not necessarily,
Not always.
but you know the rules of the game.
Yeah.
No man wants to play Monopoly if nobody knows what the rules of Monopoly are.
Right.
Nobody wants to play basketball if you don't know what the rules of basketball are. I mean, when you're a little kid and you're playing basketball or tennis or whatever, like, the number one argument was, were you in or out?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think that it's not. I guess what I should say, rather than having a hypothesis, is it's not surprising to me that young men are moving to that, because it provides a level of certainty that there's no alternative that even comes close nowadays.
I wonder, yeah, and you do see a lot of the revivals. There was a lot of revivals in the 1920s that took place. There was a lot of, there's Pentecostal revivals,
Yeah.
and others that took place during those times, right before during the
Which
middle.
paralleled the rise in communism. I mean,
Yeah.
we don't talk about it much because of depression in World War II, but
Yeah.
there was a massive rise in communism and people believing that the United States should be a communist country and things like
Yeah.
that. It's not surprising again that there would be an equal and opposite rise in more Judeo-Christian
Yeah,
values.
exactly. It is the one of the sort of ironic pieces of history is that there's been these predictions about the end of theism, the end of belief in God, the end of Christianity, forever and ever and ever. There's like, well, I think was it Voltaire? I believe it was Voltaire's house is now owned by like the Christian Missionary Society or something. He's the one that said in 100 years religion will be no more because we will become so scientifically enlightened. And people have
Mhm.
realized that science is important. I'm a big believer, but at the same time, scientific enlightenment does not satisfy the soul. Scientific enlightenment does not make a person a full human being. It takes something more than that. And that kind of realization, I think, is one of the reasons that I believe that when in Kenny G's day, we will be who knows, be flying around in electric cars that,
Yeah.
the Tesla 10 that the son of Musk, one of the sons of Musk has created or something, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm quite sure that religion is going to be a very big part of that scenario as well, because that's just who human beings are. It's part of that unchangeable
Yeah.
human nature.
Yeah, the more I think about this with young men trending towards that, it just makes more sense. I mean, men like to have purpose and they like to build stuff.
Right,
Well, what provides more purpose than religion?
right,
And when I say build stuff, I don't just mean putting nails in boards and building like houses and stuff like that. I mean
right.
building things like
Well, building community. I mean, so
yeah, community
most
could be a part of it. But I don't just mean like, again, I don't mean just the extremes of the abstract like community
right,
and the nuts and bolts like building a car. I don't mean
right,
just those extremes. I mean all the stuff in between.
right.
Um, they like building stuff. And I think that what what they've had so far in their young experience, and let's say if you're under 25 years old, is mostly chaos.
Yeah, exactly.
It's been very unsettling times. Their 18 or 20 years of Thanksgivings are not like what you and I had, where people
Right.
had disagreements, but they still had common ideals and beliefs that bound people together, and that's been lacking. So what are they going to do? They're going to build it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you think about a 17-year-old right now, born at the great financial crisis in
Yeah,
2008 and gone through COVID and had their entire
yeah,
world upside down in COVID. I mean, these young people, these young men in particular, their entire life has been chaotic, as you say. And so there's got to be, if you've gone through that, there's got to be a longing for something eternal, something that never changes. Because if life is always
yeah,
changing, I think you're like you want something that isn't going to change, that hasn't changed, and that is going to give meaning, purpose. I mean, there's the human being. Some of the best philosophers I've ever read talk about the need for people to have meaning in their life. Not just we go to work, we do our thing. There's fulfillment in accomplishing tasks and advancing and all these kinds of things, learning stuff. But we got to have something beyond that. We got to have meaning. We got to have a sense of awe and wonder about the universe. It's again built into us, I would say, because that's how God created us to have
yeah,
that, so that there's a natural longing for God. But they haven't had much in terms of meaning, because anything that they have had is meaning. I mean, if you're in school and all of a sudden, no, you can't go to school for a year because you're in lockdown. Well, this was a stable part of your life, and now it's not a stable part. So everything around them is telling them there's no meaning, there's nothing stable, there's no real purpose that can't be upended by government mandate or by some circumstances around you, by a bug from a Chinese lab or whatever. Zinger.
yeah.
Um, you know, I think that is
Penguin, you mean a bug from a penguin?
but yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, pangolin, right. Don't bite
As
bite
you
a
were
bat.
talking about, I was when you said, imagine you were born in 2008, you're 17 years old, and you're born in the GFC, and you go to school, and you were talking about the disruptions, things like that. The other thing I hadn't really thought about this before, but um, also if you were born in 2008, you came into junior high and high school, you know, what you would have been in junior high, let's say 20. When you go to when you go to junior high, 12 years old when
Like
you go to
12
high
years
school or
old,
junior
yeah, I
high.
think.
Yeah, 12
Yeah.
years old.
Yeah.
So,
2020.
2019,
Time.
2020. So right at the peak in 2019, 2020, right at the peak of
Yeah.
if you're a straight white male,
Right.
you are the problem.
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do to fix that.
Right.
And so imagine that contrast to you walk into a church and there's this all loving God who created you and you're special and you're unique and he loves you despite all your flaws and all that. I mean, think about that contrast of
Yeah. Yeah.
in school being told that you are not worthy of any of those things.
Right.
Doesn't mean we don't crave it still. I mean, we're
Right.
still human. We still crave appreciation and understanding and
Yep.
belonging and all those things. I mean, think about that contrast. I never even thought about that before, but think about that contrast of your history teacher telling you that you were the problem for the thing that happened 200 or 400 years before
Right.
you were born versus going to church and here's an all-loving God who can't wait to see you again
Yeah.
and despite all your flaws, you're the most wonderful thing he ever created. That's a
Yeah.
pretty stark contrast.
Well, yeah, and it's a 100% setup for what we see happening in the world right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just
Like unintended, for them, it's unintended consequences, I would say.
yeah. Oh, exactly, exactly. Well, and you wonder. I wonder sometimes as I think about these turnings and the details with which we have now these secular ages. You just wonder if there will ever be enough understanding of these things so that we'll be able to move past them. I don't think so. I don't think that's going to ever be possible because I think the flow of humanity is just too I mean it's too big a ship to ever change.
Yeah, I think this is the only argument that I could see for what do they call it? Is it singularity? Is that the
Oh, the singularity
merging?
thing. Yeah.
I oddly, I think that's the only case you could make for how that can happen is because the machine would keep you in balance a little more than just emotional driven
Right.
decision making.
Right. But still unlikely because human nature is ultimately what runs the world.
Yeah. Well, some would say in the Bible it talks about how we're flawed.
Yep, that's that yeah, it's all been planned. Absolutely.
Well, as Dave mentioned, if you have comments about what we're talking about, you can go to unsilentpodcast.com or Rumble has a good comment section. Dave and I are trying to explain to future generation what this moment in time is like, as they would no doubt look back and say, what the hell are those people thinking? And with that, I guess we'll wrap it up today, Dave. Huh? So until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be Unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.